Every home hides secrets, but some truths refuse to stay buried. Stay with us. Subscribe so you don't miss stories like this one while we step inside a mansion where love, silence, and betrayal collide. It begins on the night a chandelier trembled, and a boy was told he did not belong. The chandelier trembled as though it had overheard something shameful. Guests filled the marble hall with murmurs and glass clinks, but all sound fell flat when Helena stepped forward. Her eyes, polished like stones under pressure, fixed on Adrian, who was clutching a book to his chest. "You're a disappointment," she said flatly. The words echoed. A hush spread wider than the hall itself. Adrian's grip slipped. The book fell, its spine splitting against the marble. For a breath, he thought the ground might swallow him whole, and part of him wished it would. Helena's manicured finger hovered a hair's breadth from his cheek. "Do you hear me? A disappointment. You don't belong here." He tried to answer, but his throat closed. He felt the eyes of everyone, investors, family friends, and strangers who now knew him only as the boy, publicly unmasked. And then the sound of footsteps broke the paralysis. A tray rattled faintly as Rosa, the housekeeper, walked 3 steps into the hall. She stopped beside Adrian, her presence quiet but immovable. "With permission, Senora Helena," Rosa said evenly. "The boy is polite. He is well raised." The room stiffened. Some guests blinked in surprise, others lowered their gazes. Nobody ever spoke to Helena like that, least of all Rosa, who was meant to glide unseen in the background of the family's grandeur. Adrian looked up at her. For the first time all evening he felt less alone. The silence that followed was heavy, charged, as if the chandelier itself were listening for what would come next. Helena's lips pressed into a line, her face powdered yet paler than before. She turned sharply, her heels clacking against the marble, and walked away without another word. Conversations resumed cautiously, a wave of whispers rushing into the vacuum she left. Adrian bent to pick up his book, hands trembling. The pages were bent, one corner torn. He tucked it under his arm, pretending not to notice the glances still darting his way. Rosa leaned toward him just enough for him to hear. "Hold your head, Menino. No shame in you." He nodded faintly, though his chest burned with humiliation. When the evening ended, Adrian slipped upstairs before his father could say anything. He entered his room and closed the door with more force than intended. The walls, painted a pale ivory, stared back without comfort. He sat on the bed, holding the damaged book, and let the shame wash over him in waves. It wasn't just Helena's words. It was the way the guests had stared, confirming a suspicion that had lived in him for years. He was tolerated, not celebrated, allowed to exist in the grand house, but never truly belonging. Hours passed before he rose. Outside the window, the garden lamps glowed faintly. He thought of Rosa, her steady tone, her audacity to speak for him. The image played again and again in his mind. Her stepping into the hall, as though drawn by a string pulled tight over time. Adrian placed the book on his desk, smoothing the torn corner, then lay back on the bed. Sleep came in fragments, like shards of a mirror. At dawn, faint music reached his ears, a melody soft and unfamiliar, but oddly tender. He sat up, confused, and followed the sound. Down the corridor, past portraits of ancestors he had never met, he descended toward the service wing. The song drifted from the kitchen. He stopped at the threshold. Rosa stood by the stove, humming while stirring milk. The tune carried something haunting, a lullaby that pressed against his memory. He spoke before realizing it. Where did you learn that song?" Rosa turned slightly, her eyes widening just a little. The ladle paused mid-stir. She held his gaze for a heartbeat, then looked back at the pot. "Old song," she said, "from long ago." Adrian stepped closer. "I've heard it before. I don't know where, but I know it." His voice cracked. "Please tell me." But Rosa said nothing more. She poured the milk into a cup, placed it on the table, and pushed it gently toward him. "Drink," she said softly. He obeyed, though his thoughts whirled. The warmth of the cup seeped into his palms, steadying him. Yet the silence between them was heavier than the night before. Later, back in his room, Adrian tried to recall every fragment of memory the melody had touched. Faint images, shadows of a cradle, a voice not Helena's, the smell of lavender soap, a woman's laughter, blurred but gentle. He pressed his hands to his temples, frustrated by how close and how distant it felt at once. That night, at dinner, Helena barely looked at him. His father, Marcus, spoke about business deals, contracts, expansions of his technology empire. Adrian listened quietly, nodding when expected, but all the while the lullaby played in the back of his mind. Rosa moved through the dining room with her usual quiet efficiency, but Adrian now saw her differently, not just as the housekeeper, but as the keeper of a secret. When the plates were cleared, Adrian excused himself early. He wandered the upper halls, restless. The house, vast and glowing under chandeliers and sconces, felt less like a home than a stage built to conceal truths. He paused before a locked door at the end of the corridor, the attic stair. He had been told never to enter. He placed his hand on the knob. Cold brass met his skin. He turned it slightly, testing, but it was locked as always. Still, the idea rooted in him. Somewhere in this house, answers waited, dust-covered and hidden. As he stepped back from the door, a faint draught brushed his cheek. The house seemed to breathe, whispering things only Rosa might understand. Adrian whispered to himself, "I will find out." The chandelier in the hall below flickered as if in agreement. The following day carried the kind of silence that felt orchestrated. The marble floors reflected the morning light, but Adrian sensed tension beneath the polished surfaces. Helena moved through the house with clipped footsteps, her perfume leaving sharp trails in the air. She did not look at him. Marcus buried himself in meetings, calls, numbers, and Rosa continued her duties, though Adrian noticed how her eyes lingered on him when she thought he wouldn't see. At school, Adrian said little. His classmates greeted him, but their laughter felt like glass against his skin. The memory of Helena's words still rang in his ears, unshakable. By the time he returned home, he carried the weight of them like stones in his pockets. That night, the house prepared itself for another dinner. Guests were fewer this time, only a couple of business partners. Yet Helena dressed as if for a gala, her diamonds catching every flicker of candlelight. Adrian sat quietly, pushing food around his plate. Rosa moved between the table and the kitchen, her tray steady, her eyes unreadable. When the plates were cleared and Marcus launched into another story about negotiations overseas, Adrian excused himself. He left the dining room, his pulse heavy. He needed air, but the garden seemed uninviting. Instead, he climbed the stairs, drawn again toward the end of the corridor where the attic door stood locked. He touched the knob once more, still unyielding, still holding secrets. He whispered, almost against his will, "What are you hiding from me?" No answer came, only the faint groan of wood as the wind pressed against the windows. Later, when the house had quieted, Adrian heard it again. The melody, that lullaby. It drifted faintly, almost ghost-like, through the corridors. He followed it, heart pounding, afraid it might vanish if he moved too fast. Down the staircase, through the dimly lit hall, past portraits with eyes that seemed to follow him. The song led him to the kitchen again. He stopped at the threshold. Rosa stood near the counter, folding linens, her lips shaping the tune. Adrian's voice trembled when he spoke. "That song. I remember it. I don't know how, but I do." Rosa froze for a moment, then continued folding. She answered without looking at him. "It's old. Nothing to remember." Adrian stepped closer. "I'm telling you, I know it. I saw something, a cradle, a woman's voice. It wasn't Helena's." His throat tightened as he added, It felt like it was mine." Rosa placed the folded linen on the counter. She finally turned, her expression firm yet sorrowful. "You should not chase shadows, Menino. They will only hurt you." Her words struck him deeper than the scolding from the night before. He felt a storm rising in his chest. "Why won't you tell me? You defended me in front of everyone. You sang that song like it belonged to me. And now you act like none of it matters." Rosa's gaze softened, but she shook her head. "Because some truths are not mine to give." Adrian clenched his fists, helpless against the wall she built with her silence. He wanted to push, to demand, but something in her voice warned him to stop. He left the kitchen without another word. Back in his room, he paced. The lullaby replayed endlessly in his mind, weaving itself around the fragments of memory it had awakened. He thought of the book he had dropped in the hall, the humiliation, the way Rosa had stood for him when no one else had. He whispered aloud, "She knows. She knows something about me." The following days passed in fragments. Helena resumed her cold routines. Marcus remained absorbed in work, and Rosa moved silently, though Adrian sensed every gesture concealed more than it revealed. He caught her glancing at him when he practiced piano in the library, her eyes distant, as though she heard more than the notes. One evening, unable to contain himself, Adrian lingered after dinner, while Rosa cleared the plates. He leaned closer and said quietly, "Please tell me what that song means." Rosa kept her eyes on the dish she was carrying. "It means someone once loved you enough to sing you to sleep." The words landed in his chest like a weight he could not lift. He wanted to ask who. He wanted to demand details, but Rosa walked away before he could form the question, vanishing into the kitchen. That night, Adrian lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The chandelier in the hallway cast faint patterns through his doorframe, patterns that shifted with the draft. He thought of Rosa's words, replayed them, and wondered whose voice had first given the song life. When sleep finally came, it was filled with half-formed images, a woman holding him, smiling, Rosa standing nearby, and Helena's sharp voice cutting across like shattered glass. At dawn, Adrian wandered through the house. The silence pressed against him. He paused once more at the attic door, his hand grazing the knob. This time, he felt something stronger than curiosity. He felt certainty. Whatever truth Rosa refused to speak, it was hiding here, behind locked wood, dust, and the weight of years. The chandelier above the hall flickered again, as though echoing his thoughts. Adrian whispered to the empty corridor, "I'll find it. I have to." And with that vow, the house seemed to exhale, its secrets pressing closer around him. The days after the lullaby felt heavier, as if the house itself resisted every step Adrian took. He carried Rosa's words with him, looping them endlessly in his mind. Someone once loved you enough to sing you to sleep. Who had she meant? The more he asked himself, the sharper the need for answers became. Late one afternoon, when Helena had left for a charity luncheon and Marcus was locked in his office, Adrian walked the upper corridor once more. The attic door waited at the end, brass knob gleaming faintly in the filtered light. He paused, listening. The house was quiet. He reached for the knob, locked as always, but this time he came prepared. From his desk drawer, he had taken a thin letter opener. He slid it carefully into the gap, his heart racing, expecting at any moment for Rosa to appear behind him. The lock resisted at first, then gave way with a soft click. The door creaked open. Dust floated in the thin beam of light. A narrow staircase wound upward, steep and shadowed. He climbed slowly, each step groaning under his weight. At the top, He pushed against the attic door, and it opened into a room dense with forgotten years. The air smelled of cedar and mothballs. Trunks lined the walls, some half open, spilling lace and yellowed linens. Shelves sagged with books whose titles had faded. In the corner stood an old rocking chair, its cushion torn. Adrian stepped carefully between boxes, scanning the dim space. A shaft of light from the small circular window caught the edge of a wooden chest. It was smaller than the others, but sturdier, as though someone had chosen to preserve what it carried. He knelt, brushing dust away. The chest opened with a reluctant groan. Inside lay bundles of letters tied with ribbons, a silver rattle tarnished with age, and, at the bottom, a stack of photographs. He lifted the top one. His breath caught. The image showed Rosa, decades younger, standing beside a woman with kind eyes and dark hair. In her arms, the woman held a baby swaddled in white. The three of them looked like family, not employer and servant. They looked bound by something deeper. Adrian flipped the photo over. Written in faded ink were the words, "I promised to care for him, as if he were mine." His throat tightened. He whispered aloud, "As if he were mine." He rifled through the other photographs. Some showed the same woman, always with Rosa near her, always with the baby present. Sometimes Marcus appeared in the background, smiling, younger and less burdened. But Helena was nowhere in these images. Adrian's hands shook. He tucked the photographs back into the chest, but kept the first one. He stared at it as if it might explain itself. Who was the woman? Why had Rosa promised her? The stair creaked. Adrian froze, clutching the photo to his chest. He waited, heart pounding, but no one came. It was only the wind shifting the house again. He slipped the photograph into his pocket, closed the chest, and crept down the stairs, locking the attic door behind him. The photograph burned against his side, as though it carried heat. That night he could barely eat. Helena scolded him for leaving food untouched, but he barely heard her. Rosa moved silently through the dining room, and Adrian wondered if she knew exactly what he had found. Later, when the house slept, he pulled the photograph out again under the dim glow of his bedside lamp. The woman's smile seemed alive, tender, as though she could step out of the image and cradle him. He whispered to himself, "Were you the one who sang to me?" The question carried him into restless dreams. He saw Rosa standing beside the woman, whispering promises, while Helena's voice called from somewhere distant, sharp and accusing. The next morning, Adrian decided he could not keep the discovery to himself. He waited until Rosa was alone in the garden, trimming roses. He approached quietly, the photograph hidden in his hand. She looked up as he stopped beside her. "You should be at school," she said. "I need to ask you something," Adrian replied. His voice trembled, but he forced himself to continue. He pulled the photograph from his pocket and held it out. "Who is she?" Rosa's eyes widened. She reached for the photo but stopped herself, folding her hands instead. Adrian pressed on. "Tell me the truth. Why did you promise to care for me?" Rosa's lips parted, but no words came. She looked at the roses, then back at him. Her eyes glistened. "Where did you find this?" "In the attic," Adrian said quickly. "It was locked, but I had to know. I deserved to know." Rosa's shoulders sagged, the clippers falling from her hand into the grass. She whispered, "Menino, you should not have gone there." Adrian felt his chest tighten. "Then tell me why. Tell me who she was." Rosa stepped closer, lowering her voice. "She was your mother, Adrian. Not Helena. A woman who loved you beyond measure. Her name was Isabel." The name struck him like thunder. Isabel. The fragments of memory began to align, the lullaby, the laughter, the lavender soap. His hands shook. "And you? You promised her?" Rosa nodded slowly. "On the day she left this world. I swore I would protect you. I have kept that promise, though silence was the hardest part." Adrian's knees felt weak. He leaned against the garden wall. The truth, spoken at last, pressed against him from all sides. He whispered, "Why didn't Father tell me?" Rosa's eyes darkened, because grief chained him. He could not speak Isabel's name without breaking. And then Helena came. She wanted the past erased. Your father let her. Adrian clutched the photograph, his pulse racing. He looked at Rosa, the woman who had defended him in the hall, the woman who had sung the lullaby. She had been there all along, carrying a secret love. He managed to say, "You've been more of a mother to me than she ever was." Rosa shook her head. "I was never meant to replace her, only to keep her promise." Adrian's voice broke. "But you did." The garden seemed to still, even the roses bending in silence. Rosa touched his shoulder gently, her hand trembling. "Menino," she whispered, "truth is heavy. Carry it carefully." Adrian swallowed hard, staring at the photograph once more. The woman's eyes, Isabel's eyes, looked back at him, full of a love he had been starved of. As he walked back into the house, the chandelier above the hall flickered again, but this time the light seemed softer, as if acknowledging that the silence had finally begun to crack. Adrian could not let the day pass without pressing further. Rosa's confession in the garden had cracked open a door inside him, and behind it he sensed an entire life hidden away. She had said Isabel was his mother, that she had promised to protect him. The photograph still burned in his pocket, whispering truths that his father and Helena had buried. That evening, when Helena left to visit her sister and Marcus disappeared into another late meeting at his office, Adrian seized his chance. He found Rosa in the kitchen finishing her chores. She looked tired, as though every confession cost her years. Adrian said quietly, "I need to see where you live." Rosa stiffened. She replied, "It's not a place for you. Too simple, too small." But Adrian shook his head. "If you promise my mother, then your house is part of that promise. I want to see it. Please, Rosa." Her eyes searched his face. Finally she sighed, untied her apron and said, "Very well, but you must come as you are, not as the master's son, only as Adrian." The walk down the hill felt like stepping out of one world and into another. The mansion's glow faded behind them, replaced by narrow streets lined with modest homes. The air carried the smell of bread baking and children playing in the distance. Rosa led him to a small house with a red door, its paint chipped by time. Inside, the air was warm and scented faintly of herbs. The furniture was worn but polished, the kind that carried decades of use. Photographs crowded the walls, none grand, none staged, just faces smiling honestly. Adrian paused, his eyes caught by one particular picture. Rosa younger, standing beside Isabel, both of them laughing. He whispered, "She really was part of your life." Rosa nodded. "We were more than employer and servant. She was my friend, my sister in spirit." They sat at the small wooden table. Rosa poured tea into chipped cups and folded her hands. Adrian asked, his voice tight, "Why didn't you ever tell me? Why let me believe Helena was my mother?" Rosa looked down at her hands. "Because Isabel begged me not to let you suffer. She wanted you to grow with peace, not with wounds. She thought Marcus would protect you, that he would keep her memory alive. But he could not, and when Helena arrived, she filled the silence with her own story. I stayed quiet to honor Isabel, even if it broke me." Adrian's hands clenched around the cup. "Peace? Do you call this peace? To be humiliated, to be told I don't belong, when all along the truth was waiting?" Rosa's voice trembled. "I know. I have watched you suffer. Many nights I wanted to tell you, but I feared it would cost me the chance to stay near you. If Helena knew, she would have cast me out, and then who would sing the lullaby?" Adrian closed his eyes. He remembered the sound of her voice in the kitchen, the gentleness of her defense in the hall. He understood, yet anger swirled inside him. He said sharply, "You should have trusted me." Rosa flinched, then whispered, "Perhaps I should have, but I trusted the promise more. It was all I had left of her." The room fell silent, save for the ticking of a small clock on the shelf. Adrian looked around again, the modest walls, the worn cushions, the warmth that contrasted so sharply with the cold marble of the mansion. For the first time, he felt what a home might truly be. Rosa rose and crossed the room. She returned with a small box, worn at the edges. She set it on the table. "This belonged to Isabel," she said. Adrian opened it slowly. Inside were small keepsakes, a hairpin, a handkerchief embroidered with initials, a faded ribbon, and folded carefully among them a page of handwriting. He lifted it, the words blurred as his eyes filled with tears. It was a short letter written in Isabel's voice, addressed to Rosa. "My sister, if I cannot stay, promise me you will watch over him. Tell him when the time is right that he was loved more than the stars." Adrian's voice cracked as he read aloud, "Loved more than the stars." He lowered the page, unable to continue. Rosa wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "She loved you, menino. Every breath she took was for you, and I have tried in my poor way to keep that love alive." Adrian pressed the letter to his chest. He felt both comforted and crushed. Comforted to know he had been loved, crushed to realize how thoroughly that love had been hidden. He whispered, "She should have been the one raising me, not Helena." Rosa's voice steadied. "Fate does not always give us what is fair, but it gives us choices, and now you must choose what to do with this truth." Adrian looked at her fiercely. "I will not let Helena bury it. I will not let her erase my mother." Rosa reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "Be careful, Adrian. Helena has power in that house. She will fight to keep it." He met her eyes. "Then let her fight. I won't stay silent anymore." The words hung in the small kitchen like a vow. When they returned to the mansion that night, the contrast between worlds struck Adrian harder than ever. The red door closed behind them, and once again the vast house loomed, cold and watchful. Rosa resumed her quiet duties, blending back into the shadows. Adrian walked the corridor to his room, clutching the letter. At the far end of the hall, the chandelier flickered again. But this time, Adrian did not feel afraid. He felt ready. The mansion seemed unchanged the following morning, but Adrian felt the difference, like a shift in the air. He had carried Isabel's letter in his pocket all night, waking again and again to touch it, to reassure himself it was real. He had imagined the words spoken aloud, imagined Rosa's voice blending with his mother's, telling him he was loved more than the stars. But the house had ears. Secrets could not remain safe forever. One evening, as Adrian slipped into the study to reread the letter, he left the door ajar. Rosa joined him, her hands folded tightly, her voice low. She said, "Be careful, Menino. Do not show this to anyone yet. Helena will not forgive it." Adrian answered, "I don't care about her forgiveness. I care about the truth." Neither of them realized Helena was in the corridor. Her heels paused just before the door. Her body tilted forward like a shadow stretching into the room. She heard enough, the name Isabel, the tone of conspiracy, the tremor in Rosa's voice. She pressed a hand against her chest, her face tightening with something between fear and fury. Quietly, she stepped away, her silence sharper than any scream. From that night, Adrian felt the shift. Helena's eyes lingered on him longer, colder, as though weighing the danger he now represented. Rosa found herself assigned more tasks than usual, polishing silver that had already gleamed, ironing sheets until dawn, cleaning rooms that never held dust. It was Helena's way of tightening the leash of reminding her of her place. Adrian noticed. He entered the kitchen one afternoon and found Rosa scrubbing the same pan over and over, her shoulders tense. He said, "She's doing this on purpose." Rosa replied softly, "Yes, to remind me that my voice is not welcome." Adrian clenched his fists. "Then she'll have to remind me too, because I won't stay quiet." That evening at dinner, Helena's tactics shifted toward Adrian. She asked pointed questions in front of Marcus and a guest, questions that stung more than they revealed. She said, "Why do you always sulk at the table, Adrian? Don't you know how fortunate you are? Children in this world would give anything for what you have." Adrian stared at his plate, his voice controlled but sharp when he replied, "Fortunate to be insulted in my own home?" Marcus glanced up, frowning. "Adrian, enough!" Helena leaned back, her lips curving into a cold smile. "I only want him to appreciate his life, but if he prefers to mope, perhaps he should eat alone." The guest shifted uncomfortably. Adrian felt his face burn, but he forced himself to remain still. He knew if he lashed out, she would win. Later that night, he found Rosa in the servants' quarters. For the first time, he saw her sitting alone, her head bowed, shoulders shaking faintly. She quickly wiped her eyes when he entered, but not quickly enough. He said softly, "You're crying." Rosa looked away. "I'm only tired." Adrian sat beside her. "No, it's more than that. She's breaking you down because of me, because you told me the truth." Rosa shook her head. "I can endure it. I have endured worse. But it hurts me to see you carry the weight. That was never Isabel's wish." Adrian answered with sudden intensity, "I don't care what Helena wishes. I don't even care what father ignores. I won't let her erase you or Isabel. I'd rather leave this house than live, as if none of it mattered." Rosa reached for his hand, her grip firm. "Do not speak of leaving. This is still your home. Your mother wanted it to be." Adrian swallowed hard. "It doesn't feel like mine. It feels like hers. Like Helena's palace, not my house." Rosa looked at him with sorrow and pride mixed together. "Then perhaps you must claim it, but claim it with care, not with anger alone." The following days stretched under Helena's silent war. She gave Adrian icy stares at breakfast, corrected him before guests, and left subtle wounds with every remark. Yet Rosa stood by him in small ways. A glance across the room, a hand steadying a glass, a word of reassurance whispered in passing. One night, Adrian dreamed again of Isabel. This time he saw her more clearly, her smile luminous, her arms cradling him. In the dream, Rosa stood behind her, humming the lullaby. When Adrian woke, he realized the dream had given him not only longing but resolve. At breakfast, when Helena criticized him again for leaving food untouched, Adrian set his fork down and said, "Perhaps I would eat more if I were not made to feel like a guest in my own house." The silence at the table was sharp. Marcus looked up, startled, but Helena's eyes narrowed with a flicker of something almost like fear. After the meal, Rosa found Adrian in the hall. She whispered urgently, "You must be cautious. She will not stop. And Marcus, he cannot see what she's doing." Adrian replied, "Then I'll show him, I'll show everyone. She wants me silent, but I'm done with silence." Rosa touched his shoulder, her eyes shimmering. "If you do this, you will set fire to everything. Be sure you are ready to stand in the flames." Adrian looked back at her with determination. "I am." And though the house remained unchanged, the chandeliers glittering, the marble shining, Adrian felt the walls tremble faintly, as though they too had begun to listen. The storm arrived on a night when the mansion's windows rattled with rain. Adrian sat in the library, staring at the photograph of Isabel, the one he now kept hidden in his schoolbooks. He could hear Helena's voice rising in another room, sharp as broken glass. She was arguing with Marcus, and for once she was not lowering her tone. Adrian stood and moved toward the source of the voices. He paused at the top of the stairs, just beyond sight, as Helena's words cut through the air. She said, "I will not live in a house where that woman undermines me. Either she goes or I do." Marcus tried to calm her. "Helena, you're overreacting. Rosa has been with us for decades. She has always been loyal." Helena's reply was fierce. "Loyal to whom? To me? No. To the boy. To Isabel's memory. I hear them whispering. I know what she's doing." Adrian's breath caught. She knew more than he had realized. Marcus lowered his voice, but Adrian could still hear him. "You're imagining threats where there are none. Adrian is troubled, yes, but Rosa keeps him steady. You can't ask me to dismiss her." Helena's voice rose again. "I am not asking. I am telling you. I will not be second in my own house, Marcus. Choose her and you lose me." There was silence, the kind that stretched like a rope pulled taut. Adrian descended the stairs, unable to hold himself back. His voice rang out into the hall. "Then lose her." Both Marcus and Helena turned sharply. Helena's face flushed with shock, Marcus's with alarm. Adrian continued, his voice trembling but strong. "If she leaves, I leave too. Do you hear me, Father? I will not stay in this house without Rosa." Helena's expression hardened. "You dare to speak to us like this?" Adrian faced her squarely. "I dare because I have been silent too long. You humiliate me, you try to erase her memory, and you treat Rosa as if she is nothing. But she is not nothing. She is the only reason I have survived in this house." Marcus raised his hands. "Adrian, enough, this is not the time." But Adrian pressed on. "No, Father, it is exactly the time. You never say her name. You let Helena dictate what is remembered and what is forgotten. But I remember now. I know about Isabel. I know about the promise." Marcus froze. His mouth opened, but no words came. Helena's face drained of color. She whispered, "So he knows." Adrian pulled the photograph from his pocket and held it out. "I found this. I saw her face, and Rosa told me the truth. You let Helena bury it, but you cannot bury me." Marcus stepped forward, his voice heavy. "Adrian, please. That was long ago. You were so small." Adrian cut him off. "Too small to remember, but not too small to be loved. She sang to me. Rosa sang to me. And you let me believe Helena was my mother while she made me feel like a stranger in my own home." Helena's hands trembled at her sides. "Enough of this nonsense. You don't know what you're saying." Adrian turned his gaze on her. "You told me I don't belong here. You humiliated me in front of everyone. But Isabel's blood is in me, and Rosa's promise has carried me farther than your cruelty ever could. If belonging means becoming like you, then I don't want it." The words cracked through the hall like thunder. Marcus rubbed his forehead, his voice weary. "Adrian, I only wanted peace. I thought it would be easier if—" Adrian's reply came sharp. "Peace built on lies is no peace at all." Helena's eyes burned. "Marcus, you see, he is poisoned against me. If you love me, you will send her away. And this," Adrian stepped closer, his voice raw, "if Rosa leaves, I walk out with her, tonight." The three of them stood in a triangle of silence, the rain pounding against the windows as though the storm itself demanded resolution. Marcus finally spoke, his voice low. "Helena, give me time. I cannot decide this tonight." Helena turned on him, her voice breaking. "Time? You need time to choose between me and a servant?" Adrian interjected, his voice steady. "Not just a servant. She is family. She is the one who kept your promise when you could not." Marcus looked at his son, his expression torn, his shoulders sagging under years of silence. He said quietly, "Adrian, I never meant to hurt you." Adrian answered, "But you did. And now you must choose whether to keep hurting me or finally stand with me." Helena's heels clicked sharply as she turned away. "I won't stay to be insulted like this. When you are ready to be a husband instead of a coward, you know where to find me." She swept out of the hall, her figure disappearing up the staircase. The echo of her footsteps lingered long after she had gone. Adrian lowered his voice. "Father, if you send Rosa away, you lose me too. This is not a threat. It is the truth." Marcus stared at him, lips pressed tight. The weight of years hung in his eyes. He said nothing more. Adrian turned, walking toward the servants' quarters. He found Rosa sitting at her small table, her hands folded in her lap. She looked up as he entered, reading the storm in his face. He told her she gave him an ultimatum, you or her. Rosa's eyes closed briefly. And what did he say? Adrian shook his head. He asked for time, but I told him if you go, I go too. Rosa reached for his hand, her voice trembling. Menino, you should not have to carry this. Adrian squeezed her hand firmly. I'm carrying it because you carried me. I won't let you stand alone. The storm outside rattled the windows again, thunder rolling across the hills. Rosa's eyes filled with tears, though she smiled faintly. You are your mother's son, she whispered. Adrian felt the truth settle in him like an anchor. For the first time, he did not feel invisible. He felt unshakable. As he returned to his room, the chandelier swayed with the storm's wind. Its light fractured across the marble floor, scattering brightness in every direction. Adrian looked up at it and said softly to himself, "The time for silence is over." The storm had passed by the following evening, but the air inside the mansion was heavier than before. Marcus ordered a formal dinner, perhaps hoping that routine would restore balance. Helena dressed in silver, her smile sharp, her silence louder than any spoken threat. Adrian entered the dining room with the photograph hidden in his jacket pocket. Isabel's letter folded carefully beside it. Rosa moved quietly among the table settings, her face composed, though her hands betrayed a faint tremor. The chandelier cast its glittering light across polished silverware and crystal glasses. Marcus cleared his throat as the first course was served, trying to sound casual. He said, "I trust we can all enjoy a peaceful meal tonight." Helena's eyes flicked to Adrian. "Peace depends on respect. Some of us seem to have forgotten that." Adrian lifted his gaze from his plate. "Respect must be earned, not demanded." The clink of cutlery faltered. Marcus said sharply, "Adrian, not tonight." But Adrian's voice grew stronger. "No, father. Tonight is exactly the time. I am done whispering." He stood, the sudden movement rattling his chair against the marble floor. Helena's lips parted in disbelief. "Sit down this instant." Adrian pulled the photograph from his pocket and held it up for all to see. His voice trembled but did not break. "This is Isabel, my mother. The woman you never let me know, the woman Rosa promised to honor. I found her in the attic, buried among dust and silence. She loved me more than the stars, and yet you made me believe she never existed." Marcus's face blanched. His fork clattered onto his plate. Adrian continued louder now, his words echoing in the vaulted room. "You let Helena replace her memory. You let me grow up thinking I was unloved, invisible, a burden. And all the while, Rosa carried the truth for you, carried me when you would not." Helena's voice shook with rage. "How dare you parade lies at this table? That woman was nothing but a servant. She has poisoned you against your own family." Adrian turned on her, his eyes burning. "She was more family to me than you ever were. You told me I didn't belong. But I belong to Isabel. I belong to Rosa's promise, and no amount of your cruelty can erase that." Marcus rose slowly, his voice hoarse. "Adrian, please!" Adrian cut him off, his voice raw. "Say her name, Father. Say Isabel's name. Acknowledge the woman who gave me life. Acknowledge the promise you let Rosa carry alone." The room seemed to hold its breath. Helena gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. Marcus lowered his gaze, shame etched into the lines of his face. Finally Marcus spoke, his voice breaking. "Isabel, she was your mother. She was the love of my life, and I failed her by burying her memory." He turned toward Rosa, his shoulders trembling. "And I failed you. You were the one who kept her spirit alive." Rosa froze in place, the tray in her hands trembling before she set it down carefully. Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not move closer. Helena's voice sliced through the silence. "If you speak this way, Marcus, then you choose her over me. You choose ghosts and servants over your wife." Marcus looked at her, weary and resolute. "No, Helena. I choose truth, and I cannot pretend any more. The truth does not live in this house." Helena's chair scraped violently as she stood. "Then you have lost me." Adrian spoke firmly. "No, Helena, you never had us." Helena's eyes blazed with hurt and fury. She turned sharply and left the room, her heels striking the marble with finality. The chandelier swayed slightly, its light fractured across the long table. Marcus sat heavily, his face buried in his hands. Adrian remained standing, chest heaving, the photograph still clenched in his fingers. He said softly, almost to himself, "The truth belongs here, not in the attic." Marcus lifted his head, eyes glistening. "You are right, Adrian. I thought I was protecting you by keeping silence, but I see now that I was protecting myself from grief, from the pain of remembering." Adrian's voice cracked. "And in doing so, you left me alone." Marcus's hand trembled as he reached across the table. "I will not leave you again." Rosa stepped forward then, hesitant, as though afraid her presence might shatter the fragile moment. Adrian turned toward her, his voice steady. "You kept the promise when no one else would. Tonight you sit at this table with us, as family." Rosa's lips parted, her breath catching. She whispered, "Adrian, this is not my place." But Marcus looked at her and said, "It should have been all along. Sit, Rosa." For a long moment she hesitated. Then, with trembling hands, she pulled out a chair and sat at the edge of the table. The gesture seemed to shake the foundations of the house more than Helena's exit had. Adrian looked between them, his father finally speaking Isabel's name, Rosa finally at the table where she belonged. He felt a weight lift from his chest, though he knew the storm was not over. He whispered, "This is where the healing begins." The chandelier's crystals caught the candlelight, scattering it in dozens of directions, as though Isabel herself had chosen that moment to bless the truth. The mansion felt quieter after Helena's departure, though the silence no longer carried menace. It was a silence of aftermath, of a house learning to breathe again. For days, Adrian moved through the corridors with the photograph of Isabel close at hand, sometimes slipping it from his pocket just to look into her eyes. Marcus spent more time outside his office, though he often seemed lost, staring into corners, as if chasing memories he had long forbidden himself. Rosa resumed her duties, yet something had shifted. When she entered a room, people looked at her differently. Marcus spoke to her with a tone of respect, no longer confined to the distance of employer and servant. Adrian found himself searching for her presence constantly, reassured by her steady calm. One afternoon, Marcus invited Adrian to sit with him in the study. The shelves towered around them, heavy with unread books. Marcus folded his hands and said quietly, "I was wrong to let Helena erase Isabel. I thought silence would protect us from grief. Instead, it built walls between us." Adrian replied, his voice careful, It built a wall between me and you, between me and the truth. Marcus nodded. I want to do better. I want you to know your mother as I knew her. She laughed easily, she loved fiercely, and she believed in every note you play at the piano. She wanted music to be your gift. Adrian swallowed hard. Then maybe that's how I'll keep her with me. Through music. The following evening, Rosa found Adrian in the music room. His fingers moved across the keys, but this time the sound was different. No longer precise and mechanical, but filled with emotion. Rosa stood in the doorway, listening, as though each note pulled threads from the past into the present. When he noticed her, Adrian said, I never played for myself before, only because it was expected, but tonight I wanted to hear her voice in the music. Rosa stepped closer. And did you? Adrian nodded. Yes, for the first time. Later, Rosa walked in the garden, tending to the roses. Adrian watched her from the balcony before joining her. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of earth and blossoms. Rosa trimmed a stem carefully, but her hands were steadier than they had been in weeks. Adrian said softly, I asked Father to say her name, and he did. I asked him to recognize you, and he did. But I know Helena's words hurt you. She called you nothing more than a servant. Rosa placed the clippers down and turned to him. Words can wound, yes, but I know what I am. I am the woman who promised Isabel, and I am the one who kept that promise. That is enough for me. Adrian looked at her firmly. It isn't enough for me. I want you to be more than that in this house. You are family. Her eyes glistened. Family is not always about names or blood. Adrian answered, No. It is about love that stays, love that defends, love that sings lullabies when no one else will. By that measure, you are more family than anyone. Rosa reached out, her hand trembling as it touched his cheek. You are your mother's son, Adrian, and now, finally, you are seen. The garden lights flickered as night deepened, casting warm circles across the paths. Marcus joined them quietly, his voice low. I've been blind for too long. I thought wealth could replace what we lost. But you, Rosa, you gave him what I could not. You gave him Isabel's love when mine faltered. Rosa lowered her gaze. I only did what she asked. Marcus shook his head. You did more. You became the thread that held this family together. For a long moment, the three of them stood in silence, the air thick with unspoken gratitude and grief. Then Adrian said, We can start again, not as master and servant, not as silence and shame, but as a family, imperfect and still healing. Marcus placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Yes, we start again. Days later, when Helena's absence had become routine rather than shock, Adrian prepared a simple dinner. He set 3 places at the long dining table. Rosa hesitated when she saw her seat prepared beside his, but Adrian pulled the chair out and said, This is yours. She sat slowly, her eyes moist, and Marcus raised his glass. To Isabel, who gave us love, to Rosa, who kept it alive, and to Adrian, who finally brought truth back to this house. They clinked glasses softly, the sound delicate, fragile, but hopeful. That night, Adrian returned to the piano. He played, not for an audience, not for expectation, but for himself and for the memory of his mother. The notes carried through the mansion, filling rooms that had long echoed with silence. Rosa listened from the hallway, her hand pressed against her chest. Marcus stood in the doorway, tears in his eyes. As the final chord lingered, Adrian whispered to himself, Family is not who shares your name. Family is who keeps the promise. The chandelier above the hall flickered once, then steadied, casting its light across a house that, for the first time, felt like a home. In the end, this story reminds us that family is built on love, not just names or blood. If this touched you, subscribe for more stories, like the video to help it reach others, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice keeps these stories alive.